So to kind of open up this conversation, Jeremy, let me ask you a question. And just think about this very carefully. If I told you that I had a book right next to me that had every chapter of your life written out, when you get married, when you have kids, when you complete different stages of your career, and when you die, would you want to read that book? Would you want to know when and how your life ends?
Absolutely not. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to this, but that's kind of the journey of life, is to explore the world and learn as you go. I mean, that would just like take away all the fun and all the excitement of what's to come next, right? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would say no as well. But this idea is essentially the concept of fate. The idea that when we're born, our life is written, it's set in stone. There's nothing we can do to avoid it.
So that people are obviously very complex, and I think that like we have like trillions of particles, but at the root of it, we're just that. And I think that if you were able to take into account the initial conditions of every person, like where they were born, what their parents are like, what their upbringing is like, their environment, and you're able to kind of like assign a probability that based on their actions, that what they were going to take, you could pretty well model someone's life on a computer simulation. You could I would argue, given a powerful enough computer, you could probably almost 100% say every decision they'll make in any circumstance, because you kind of form this identity of who you are. It's almost like machine learning and AI, right? You kind of get like the program learns as it's executed. So I think people are kind of like that. I mean, you hear that all the time. Babies being compared to learning machines. They're everything they see, they're taking in all this stuff, and you can kind of like, based on all these things we just talked about, even how much the kid is loved. I mean, you could kind of, for every single decision they make, every outcome, you could potentially model it to pretty high accuracy.
That's incredible. I want to make sure our listeners really, understand what you just said there. You can model every possible outcome of someone's life based on having a computer simulation, and any decision. It's almost like I'm visualizing a tree, like a genetics tree, and like if they, if they're X or Y, then then it leads to this A or B. You know what I'm saying? So it's, what would it be, billions of possible outcomes?
Much more than that.
But you would be able to kind of understand, like essentially there's a finite number, right?
There is a finite number
of outcomes based on number. Right, possible simulations. Biologically, genetically, psychologically, physiologically, there is lots of evidence that indicates that we are not completely in control of the decisions we make.
Mm-hmm. I know that there's also been an experiment where they had a guy in a room hooked up to an EEG machine, which reads your brain waves, and they said, whenever you want, please push this button. Have you seen this?
Yeah. Actually, yeah.
A great one.
But go ahead. What
I'm trying to say is that they were able to determine that the guy was going to click the button before he did.
Exactly.
So what are we talking about when we're talking about free will? So if your brain is already broadcasting your action, does that mean that you don't have free will, or does that mean that subconsciously you're going to act this way, which means you do have free will? Like, is your subconscious linked to your free will?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And I mean, we have to kind of narrow down, are we talking about the conscious decision to act or the action itself? Because to your point, it might just be the brain processes that demonstrate the decisions being made before it's being made. But that's an interesting experiment. And I was going to talk about that, but there's another one that talks about something very similar. It's by this guy, Ben Libe. And Jeremy, very similar to what you said, he essentially had these participants move their arm. You might have heard of this one too. It's very similar. And he scanned their brains. They did a functional magnetic resonance imaging scan and said, move your arm. And again, as you said, the brain activity increased even before they were aware of their decision to move your arm, right? Like, we have coffees in front of them. And I said, Jeremy, do you want to pick up your coffee? Are you going to pick up your coffee? Before you even decide if you're going to, like, I can see what decision you're making. So Libe interpreted this to mean that, when the brain decides to make the movement, the person only becomes consciously aware of the decision after it's made. So what does this mean for free will, Jeremy? It means that our behavior is controlled by neurobiology, and free will may not exist. We might be slaves to our genes. I mean,